Okay, we are back. Now I'll explain a little bit about creating a very simple web server in Node.js. So this is how it is going to look. Let's first write npm run. Okay, so it's running nodemon on the simple web server that we are in here. And the nodemon part was the part that was listening for changes, and when we change something, it'll rerun the web server and making the newest changes, kind of getting them into effect. Cool. The first line, express. We require express. What does this mean? It means kind of use the library called express and put it into this variable. And the reason we can do this is because we have it in our dependencies, and we have also run npm install, which will install all our different dependencies. Okay, and it'll add them to the node modules. Yes, that's actually an important part. When you get a new project down, the first thing you do is you run npm install. What that will do is it will run through all of the different dependencies that you have in your project and install all of these files so that we can use them like this. So basically we require express. And what is express? Express is it's a framework that makes it easier for us to create a web server in Node. And you can kind of go researching Express Node if you want to. It's like a big library and it can do a lot of things. Yeah, fast, unopinionated, minimalist web framework for Node.js. Okay, cool. What we do to begin with is we create an app, and we'll just call the express function here, and we'll get an app. And now, as I told you in the beginning, you know, the web is kind of consisted of you send a request and you get a response. Okay, so now we are the web server. Okay, and let me just find this image here. So we are now implementing this web server here. Okay, it will get a request in from a laptop, for example. Then we have to do something with that request, and then we send a response back to the laptop, or to the client. We normally call it client and server. And how does that look? Well, it looks like this. We define a root, which in this example is just gonna be slash. So we use the function called get, app.get. We say it should be slash, and then we give it a function. Okay, so what happens when we go to the slash site here? Okay, how we can do that is we see down here it says ready on localhost :3000. So we can go to that website here, localhost 3000. Localhost is like the address for your own computer. It's like the IP address, you can kind of say, for your own computer. This :3000, this specifies like the port where the server is listening for requests. And you don't have to go too much into detail with this, but this is just basically where our web server is running when we are running the web server on our own computer. Okay, so the slash is this part here. Okay, and what this will do is that app.get will listen for requests on this URL, just slash localhost like this. when it gets a request, it will call this function here. Okay. The function that will get called will get a request and a response. Okay, so you see where this is coming. We have a request that we can try and log out like this, and then we can send a response back to the client. Okay, so let's try and see what happens. Localhost. Okay, let's go into the network tab and see. So here we can see the response that we are sending. We are sending a request to localhost 3000, and the response that we are getting back is this code here. Okay, and you see this is the same as this, but we did something else as well. We also logged out the request, and the request we can see here. The request is basically, it's just an object with lots of different information on it, lots of keys, lots of values. So now we've basically made a web server, right? So we can, if we wanted to call this or maybe about, then what this function will do is it will listen for requests coming to the /about root. When a request comes, it's gonna call this function here. Okay, so if you want to run this function here, okay, you can't just rerun the server. Let's scroll down here. Okay, you can't just rerun the server. To run this function here, we have to go to this URL. It's kind of like the click event. You know, we take a button and we say .add event listener click. Okay, this is kind of the same. Just this code is not waiting for a click on a button. This code is waiting for a request to this URL. Okay, so if we go to this, we shouldn't see anything. Cannot get, super. But if we go to the about, we'll see the HTML that we sent to it. Okay. So you can build your website up now with this web server. But the way that we will be using the web server is not sending HTML like we are doing here, but is sending data or responding with data instead. Okay, so let's comment this out and comment this in. This is more kind of like what you are going to be using. You are going to maybe go to a page called API and users, and then when we go to this URL, you will send back some data. So let's try and see just how that looks. API users, and then we see here that we are sending some JSON back. This is what you have to learn for now. It's creating a simple web server where you go to a specific URL and then you are responding with some text. This response, you can see here I'm using .send, here I'm using .json. If you want to know a little bit more about that, just Google express response. Express response, and then we can try and go in and read a little bit about what exactly is it the response is, how do we use it, and those kind of things. Response here. The response object represents HTTP response that an Express app sends when it gets an HTTP request. Okay, yes. Let me just double check that I've talked about everything that I want. No, I haven't. We've made a simple web server using a route here, and then sending some response back to the client when we get a request. Okay. Now in Node.js, you can make kind of your own libraries like this, and I have an example of this here in the addition.js. So here we have a function here called addition. It's a function that has two parameters, a and b, and it then returns a plus b. If you're not super sharp with the arrow function, then this is the same as this. This is automatically returned. Okay. So what we do here is we say this addition function we want to export so that I can import it somewhere else, or so that I can require it. And that looks like this. So if I want to use the addition, then I will just say require, and then I have to find the addition file. So I say / means from where I am right now, and then just addition.js. And now we can try and log addition out, and we see it's a function. Cool. Now let's try and say like 9 and 10. So hopefully we'll see 19 here. Yes. Okay. The nice thing about this is that once we start building our application out, there'll be more and more code, and it's always nice to kind of compartmentalize stuff. What's it called? I can't remember the name right now. There is a name for it. But divide our code into smaller parts. Okay. That is what this allows us to do. Okay. So that we can define some functionality in here. We just export it using module.exports, and we give it what we want to export. This can be like, we could just export 9, for example, or we could export an object with like something. It doesn't really matter what we export, as long as it's JavaScript, then it works. And then where we want to use this functionality, we just require it, kind of like we did with Express, but here we have to find the actual file that we're using. Okay, so we require it and assign it here. Yes. So we could, for example, if we wanted to, combine these two things that we learned, and say that when we get a request on API/users, then we will respond with some JSON that is the return of this function, which should be 19. So let's try and see if that works. Yes. Okay. So now we are like combining some different things here. Have I now talked about what I wanted to? Question. There we go. So I've talked about modules homemade, talked about the npm modules. That's also what it's called, the modules that we have in package.json. We've talked about the node modules. We haven't talked about npm.js.org, but you can go here, and then you can find all the different libraries that we can use in our package.json, and there is like things for everything. Yeah, you can just like find, there's thousands of libraries, as you see here. Yes, then we talked about the gitignore, we talked about NodeMon, and we played a little bit around with Express. Yes, Later on you'll get a bit more into detail with exactly how this works, but just use kind of copy the code here and then and use it in your application. In the Node.js folder there is links for all of these different boilerplates. A boilerplate is like, instead of writing all of this kind of code every time you have to make a new project, you use some project that someone has already wrote, so it's a little bit easier. Yes, cool. That was it for this time. Thank you. Bye.